Tonight on Primetime, the Middle East on the edge. Operation Epic Fury fully underway, and President Donald Trump confirms 3 US service members have been killed, warning combat will continue until all US objectives are met. Meanwhile, Israel is calling up 100,000 reservists as Hezbollah targets are struck in southern Beirut. The war spirals while the world watches. Good evening. US and Israeli strikes have escalated tensions across the Middle East, hitting Iran, Lebanon, Iraq, and Bahrain. Tehran and Beirut face heavy attacks, while US forces report casualties as ongoing operations continue.
US President Donald Trump said on Sunday combat operations in Iran are ongoing and will continue until all of Washington's objectives are achieved. In a video posted on the Truth Social platform, Trump confirmed that 3 US service members had been killed and warned there could be further losses, vowing to avenge the deaths of Americans.
Over the past 36 hours, the United States and its partners have launched Operation Epic Fury, one of the largest, most complex, most overwhelming military offensives the world has ever seen. Nobody's seen anything like it. We have hit hundreds of targets in Iran, including Revolutionary Guard facilities, Iranian air defense systems. Just now it was announced that we knocked out 9 ships plus their naval building, all in a matter of literally minutes. Combat operations continue at this time in full force, and they will continue until all of our objectives are achieved. We have very strong objectives. They could have done something 2 weeks ago, but they just couldn't get there.
Tehran was hit by intense strikes on Sunday night, with explosions, fires and air raid sirens across the city. The assault began around 2100, hitting multiple sites, including state-run IRIB facilities. The Israel Defense Forces targeted the IRGC headquarters, while Israel plans to call up 100,000 reservists along borders and in contested areas. Prime Minister Netanyahu said airstrikes are intensifying. US President Trump said 48 senior Iranian officials had been killed, with 3 US service members dead and 5 wounded. The IRGC launched the 9th wave of Operation True Promise 4. Explosions were also reported in Jerusalem, Tel Aviv and other parts of Israel. 2 drones reportedly targeted the US Victoria military base near Baghdad International Airport. One drone fell inside the base's special operations area, and the other was intercepted by US air defenses. The logistics support center was reportedly a target. No details on casualties or damage have been released, and investigations are ongoing. Thick smoke was seen over Manama on Sunday after what appeared to be Iranian strikes hit Bahrain's main US naval base. The fire came from the base, which hosts the US Navy's 5th Fleet HQ. After attacks by Israel and the US, Iran said it had retaliated against Israeli and nearby US targets across the Arabian Gulf. On Monday, Israel carried out airstrikes on Hezbollah-controlled southern Beirut after rocket and drone attacks on Israel. Over a dozen explosions were reported, forcing residents to flee. The strikes targeted senior Hezbollah members in Dahiyeh, with evacuation warnings for villages in southern and eastern Lebanon. Several rockets from Lebanon landed in open areas. One was intercepted, and no casualties or damage were reported.
Okay, joining us now is our very own Orkan Amashov. Orkan, good to have you with us. So much unfolding so quickly, and frankly, so many questions. I mean, people have been writing into us asking things like, will Iranian attacks on Gulf countries increase now or decrease? Will anyone earnestly get back around the negotiating table? And also, what does all this mean for the South Caucasus and Central Asia region?
Thank you very much, Guy. A number of questions to be asked, a number of questions to be dealt with in a very compartmentalized fashion. Indeed, what started in the morning of the 28th of February when the US and Israel jointly attacked Iran prompted a retaliatory action moves from Iranian side, creating completely new reality within the wider scope of Middle Eastern theater. And I think that Middle Eastern theater, the term, you should be used in a very restricted fashion, because basically the actual scope of this current confrontation, which is in many ways, I suppose, Guy, very, very different to what happened during the summer of 2025, should be understood in the proper context. The scale is different. Effectively, Iranians are not just targeting, as part of their retaliatory actions, not just targeting US military assets across the Gulf region, but they're also attacking, and deliberately, for the reasons of their own, attacking residential neighborhoods of Gulf countries, including Dubai and Bahrain, and also, of course, they are targeting Tel Aviv, which is the commercial capital of Israel, for very understandable reasons. Because after the killing of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, Iran needs to be seen doing something quite tangible, and this is a very important point. Last time, during the 12-day war, when initially, during the first hours of that war, the commanders of IRGC were targeted and exterminated, Iran looked incredibly hopeless. But now the situation is very different, because killing of the Supreme Leader puts a massive complexion on the entire matter. They need to choose a new leader, and currently we know that three-man interim council has been established. It is in a functional mode. There are three characters there. One of them is President Masoud Pezeshkian, Chief of Justice, is there as well, and also Ayatollah Arafi, which is coming from the Guardian Council, which is a 12-member body, essential ingredient of the Islamic Republic of Iran. They will need to choose supreme leader, and but that is also problematic in its own, because basically this operation, which is widely described and referred as Operation the Fury, and I think the Israelis are using different term, roaring lions, but basically it's not just about decapitation, it's about actually, in the fullness of time, I suppose, bringing an end to the current system in Iran. But we'll come to that point a bit later. This is a very complex and nuanced matter. So Iran's internal system should be understood in the right context as well. But before I return to Iran's resilience, which is part of this debate, I would like to focus why the scope is different on this particular occasion, and also the speech delivered, currently being delivered by Prime Minister Keir Starmer. As I speak to our audience, Guy, the Prime Minister is delivering his remarks, and because British overseas bases in Cyprus have been targeted, fires have been intercepted, but UK fundamentally, on the basis of the advice received by British Prime Minister this morning, the legality of this operation is not being uniformly accepted. In fact, that particular advice the Prime Minister received this morning suggests that it is not a legal war. Therefore, UK needs to calibrate. And how UK is going to calibrate? UK's position will be that we are not joining the offensive strikes, but we're going to be part of the defensive operation by letting UK bases being used by United States. That's going to be UK position. Not very satisfactory for the United States, but tangible position for the UK. So scope is widening. That's what we mentioned earlier. As you said, Guy, it's particularly important for the actors in this region as well, for the South Caucasus. Azerbaijan and many other countries in this region have been following the policy of non-interference. Azerbaijan is basically saying that my territory will not be used against Iran or any other third-party country, although Azerbaijan has got very strong and absolutely vital strategic partnership with Israel, and this is very valued, and Azerbaijan is forming a strategic charter with the United States, but still, as long as this conflict is concerned, Azerbaijan is not involved at all. And I would like to say a couple of words, Guy, with your permission, if we have time, of course, about the resilience of the Islamic Republic of Iran. It's not a one-man dictatorship. It's not a one-man system there. They've got their own unique propensities. Basically, I think that the Iranian system matters now because of its complex structure, a relatively complex structure. It's a sort of a circular reinforcement system. You've got Supreme Leader who is being elected by 88-member assembly of experts, and those 88 members themselves are vetted by the Guardian Council, and they also voted as a result of popular arrangement. There's a popular vote, but also they need to be vetted. So this 88-member assembly of experts, they are electing supreme leader, but these 88 members, they're themselves vetted by the Guardian Council, and the members of the 12-member Guardian Council, half of them, 6 of them actually being appointed by supreme leader, and the other 6 being appointed or elected by the Parliament, which is being formed as a result of popular election. So it's not a simple system. It's a system wherein this triangle involving supreme leader, assembly of experts, and Guardian Council are mutually reinforcing themselves. It's not a democracy, but it's some sort of I don't want to use the term pseudo-democracy, but something which is sort of proto-democracy in many ways, informed by Iranian statehood traditions. But that gives the system resilience, Guy. That gives.
And Orkan, just let me ask a question about military strategy. Of course, it's very, very difficult to predict, but there are some analysts that are saying that Iran has now borne the brunt of the initial US-Israeli assaults, and the offensive action that we saw from Iran, that will now diminish because the military capability in Iran is getting necessarily weaker as a result of the onslaught. Others are saying, well, no, that's not necessarily the case. It could actually, there could be a resurgence and a different type of response. Have you got any thoughts, any evidence on the likely response from Iran now to this onslaught?
It's a very central question, and the question goes to the heart of the subject revolving around the resilience of the Islamic Republic of Iran in terms of its military capabilities. Well, what US is trying to achieve, let's try to understand that, and that will allow us to understand what Iran is capable of in terms of its actions, counteractions to US-Israeli attacks. Basically, US intention is to debilitate and destroy Iran's nuclear capacity, just raise it to the ground without any possibility of resurgence. That's absolutely vital. So Iran should be deprived of the opportunity and mechanisms to build nuclear capabilities at any point in the fullness of time. That's one thing. Ballistic missile infrastructure must be reduced to zero level, effectively raised to the ground. And also naval force must be destroyed. So basically what US is trying to achieve by means of these continuous and systematic attacks to reduce Iran militarily to the level from which it will never be able to emerge relatively competent, and to make sure it's not just able to hurt anybody around in terms of course, US allies, but also it will be so considerably weakened that the prestige of the regime will be diminished to the level when people actually, local population, will take over the government. I think that this is a preparation for what one may academically call regime change. I don't like the word regime. I think it's used in a pejorative context. Whenever I use the word regime, I use it in an academic context. Regime effectively means governance system there. Whatever you may think of its virtues, the term is not pejorative per se. And I think they are preparing the ground. They understand that ground invasion is absolutely impossible. Iran is not Iraq. You cannot institute ground invasion, but you could, by means of depriving the system there, Islamic Republic of Iran, its military capabilities, and IRGC, which is a beating heart of the Islamic Republic of Iran. That's a unit which gives the system its stability. When everybody else at a loss to understand what's happening, that force, that military prowess entailed at the very heart of IRGC gives the system its opportunity to survive. And what these attacks are aiming at producing, also creating tensions within that structure and making sure that they will no longer support the office of the Supreme Leader and the Council of Guardians and Assembly of Experts. But that hasn't happened yet. They're still quite solid and resilient. But what President Donald Trump said a few days ago, that I call on all the members of security apparatus to lay down arms. And this is the time. If you lay down arms now, immunity, the amnesty will be issued. But if you do not do it now, you will perish. That's what he said. So basically, President Donald Trump and I think Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu fully understand the implications. These two countries, whatever their power, cumulative power may be, they cannot change the regime there by means of active involvement on the ground. There are limits to what they can do, but they can actually take military actions, destroy the military capabilities of Iran, create the lack of morale situation, making people under the pressure of economic circumstances and also under the pressure emanating from that moment when the nation's dignity seems to be affected, cause this mayhem, making people go to the streets and change the government. That's what I think they are planning to do. But I think we should not take for granted any scenario, including what is widely described as regime change scenario. Beyond military aspect, I would like also to reflect, Guy, with your permission, on the sensibility surrounding this region, because Azerbaijan has got a special role to play, which is a humanitarian role. Astara border checkpoint has been functioning and people are coming through, not just Azerbaijani nationals who are currently in Iran, but also foreign nationals. And the question here is that if the military escalation does reach a degree of intensity when some other Iranians themselves will be forced to leave the country, what will be the position maintained by this country? It's a very dangerous situation in many ways, because the concern here, I think, for Azerbaijan, for the Gulf countries there is that, what is next? Are we ready for, do we have a contingency plan? What will happen in the case of the complete collapse of the Iranian state? We can't exclude that possibility. There does not seem to be a contingency plan. I think that's the reason why many analysts who are incredibly critical of the Islamic Republic of Iran are saying, but what next? What will happen afterwards? And I think that nobody knows. But President Donald Trump probably knows. He claimed that this war will take about 4 weeks. And after 4 weeks, US will be able to achieve all of its military objectives. But the question here is that if the achievement of those military objectives will lead to the collapse of the system, what is next? I don't think there is an answer to that question.
Okay, well, now we do know we are waiting for President Trump to speak. Sure. We've also got our very own Ubay Shahbanda standing by in Washington. Yeah. But let's just pause for a moment and we'll just go to Tehran. Okay, we're going to go to our correspondent in Tehran now. Iran's security chief Ali Larijani stressed that Tehran will not enter into talks with the United States after it has plunged the region into chaos, while top diplomat Abbas Araghchi said Iran does not want war with its neighbours hosting US bases and remains open to diplomacy.
Iran's Secretary of Supreme National Security Council, Ali Larijani, has categorically rejected talks with the United States, stressing that Tehran will not negotiate with Washington as the Israel-US invasion of Iran entered its third day on Monday. Larijani, who was a senior aide to Iran's former supreme leader killed on Saturday in the air raids, also warned that US President Donald Trump's false hopes and new lies have plunged the region into chaos, increasing the risk of further American troops' casualties. His statements on X social platform were made after Trump's remarks on Sunday about Tehran's reaching out for talks, as well as the confirmation by US military sources that 3 of its soldiers were killed and 5 wounded in Iran's attacks. However, Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi left the door of diplomacy ajar, stating that Tehran remains open to de-escalation. In phone talks with his regional counterparts, including mediator Oman, he described Iran's attacks on US bases in the regional countries as legitimate acts of self-defense. Also in a post on his X account, he said air attacks on capital have not changed Iran's war capabilities, adding that Tehran is the party to decide when and how the war will end. Meantime, Revolutionary Guards released a new footage of its underground UAV bases, showing firing them against Israel. Since Saturday, IRGC has announced in a series of statements the waves of missiles and UAV raids against Israel, as well as US assets in the region, saying the retaliatory attacks will continue with more sophisticated weapons. Turaj Shiralidu, reporting from Tehran for A News.
Okay, our next guest is Ubay Shahbanda, our man in Washington, D.C. Now, he has been closely following the political debate inside the United States as Operation Epic Fury unfolded, analysing the administration's strategic objectives, the reaction on Capitol Hill, and the growing domestic pressure surrounding the duration and potential cost of the campaign. Ube, as always, great to see you. Wow, what a few days we've had. Given Tehran's rejection of talks with Washington then, while still professing openness to diplomacy with neighbouring states, how realistic is any sort of pathway to negotiation without de-escalating tensions even further?
Well, President Trump earlier today said that the hardest blows have yet to come in Operation Epic Fury as American long-range bombers, stealth aircraft, Tomahawk missiles alongside the Israeli Air Force continue to pound Iranian military installations throughout the country. We heard from Generals Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and Secretary of War Pete Hegseth earlier today in a press briefing that this operation will continue as long as President Trump deems it necessary. So clearly here, the Trump administration officials, including President Trump's senior military advisors, indicating that the intensity of this operation will likely escalate. There's no clear timeline here purposely being given by the Secretary of War or by President Trump. President Trump has, in various comments since Operation Epic Fury commenced, has said this war could last upwards of 4 weeks or perhaps less, keeping the what remains of the government in Tehran guessing on when and where this operation will ultimately end. So clearly here, the military decision being made by the Commander-in-Chief of all American Armed Forces, President Trump, to continue this operation. And we are expected to see even greater scope of strikes. What that would entail has been purposely left ambiguous. We have heard confirmation from the Pentagon of additional American casualties that resulted from a Shahed drone striking an American Tactical Operations Center in Manama in Bahrain.
Ube, we are waiting for President Trump to speak. We'll go straight to that just as soon as that begins. In the meantime, I mean, everyone seems to be understandably obsessing about timelines. How long will this be? The rhetoric so far seems to suggest that this campaign has been very much on plan. The mention of weeks rather than months or years. Do you think there's any risk at all of this being a sort of prolonged war, the sort of war that President Trump, before he took office, vowed not to get involved in?
Undoubtedly, this is now a Middle Eastern war. We've just received confirmation from Qatar's Ministry of Defense that they have just shot down 2 Iranian Su-24 fighter bombers, aircraft. So this is for the first time now we are seeing confirmation that America's Arab allies, of course, America has a massive Al Udeid air base in Doha. That is the command headquarters of American Central Command that oversees the entire, all operations in the Middle East. And now America's Arab allies are very much in this fight. There has been a backlash in Arab capitals in the Arabian Gulf once these Iranian Shahed drones and ballistic missiles started striking and hitting civilian infrastructure in Arab states from Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Doha, Manama, Kuwait. And now we are seeing the first confirmation that air defense systems belonging to America's Arab allies are now engaging and shooting down not only Iranian missiles and Shahed drones, but also shooting down Iranian warplanes in the air. I think that is very significant. And we heard from General Dean Kane and Secretary Hegseth saying that they are employing a wide variety of American weaponry. And there was also a clear focus to justify this operation as necessary for American national security. Secretary of War Hegseth said that President Trump made his decision based on the understanding and the belief that Iran was not negotiating regarding its nuclear program in good faith. And we specifically heard from the Secretary of War in the justification for major operations here that the Trump administration would not allow Iran to essentially hold the region and American national security interests in the region hostage, and that the decision was made by President Trump to neutralize Iran's ability to produce and launch long-range ballistic missiles that the White House has deemed to be a strategic threat to its security and a strategic threat to Israel's security. We also very notably heard a direct comments from the Secretary of War saying that this is not going to be like Iraq. This is not going to be like Afghanistan. Pete Hegseth served in Iraq, that there will not be nation building. And so there was clearly an attempt here by the Trump administration to stand President Trump's decision apart from those made by his predecessors, which were viewed to be largely not only unsuccessful, but disastrous, with the United States attempting to build a democracy in Iraq, to build a democracy in Afghanistan, and essentially that operation leading to thousands of casualties and deaths of American soldiers, boots on the ground. So there's clearly here a decision made by the Trump White House not to make those past mistakes, and that this is still, that this Operation Epic Fury, is still within the bounds of President Trump's America First vision, because it ensures that America does not get stuck in quagmires. Now, of course, all plans, and while the American military has been planning for this type of operation for quite some time, plans always hit the wall of reality. And as the saying goes, the adversary also has a vote here. What will Iran do next? And that is also unclear. We heard from President Trump said that a significant percentage of Iran's leadership, command and control leadership, has been wiped out, and that might essentially leave, well, who's left for the U.S. to negotiate with? President Trump, in his comments to the press over the weekend, suggested that the initial tactical surprise that Israel and the United States was able to achieve killed many more the leadership structure in Tehran than expected. So the sentiment here in Washington seems to be that this operation is still going well. There have been friendly fire incidents. At least 3 F-15 aircraft apparently were shot down mistakenly by Kuwaiti air defense systems. The Pentagon saying that they are investigating. Those pilots managed to parachute and eject out of those aircraft and landed safely on the ground in Kuwait. So that also gives you an indication of how friendly fire incidents could lead to even more casualties of the American military servicemen than those of the missiles of the enemy. This is such a contested airspace, so many missiles flying, so many aircraft flying. These things are bound to happen, and President Trump and the Secretary of War bracing the American public that more casualties of American service members are likely to happen, as this war is likely to escalate in intensity.
And Ube, where is the public, do you think, on this? Of course, as you say, we have had the announcement that there have been the first casualties. Is the public broadly in support of this action?
I think the American public right now is widely in a let's wait and see mode. Oil prices have not skyrocketed, so there has not been a direct impact on the American pocketbooks when they go to fill up petrol or gas at the gas station. But we're still in the early phases of this military operation. And Brent crude prices are steadily increasing, but they're right now within a manageable range of around $80 a barrel or so. But what happens if the Iranians decide to launch significant attacks against refineries and crude oil production facilities in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia or in the UAE or in Kuwait? Who knows how the markets will react? One unexpected benefit that the U.S. has had in essentially changing the government in Venezuela is now that one of the world's largest oil producers, Venezuela, is now essentially a de facto American partner. So all those barrels of oils that are now flowing from Venezuela to U.S. crude oil storage facilities are expected to at least blunt any market shocks that would result from some sort of extraordinary strike against major oil storage and production facilities in the Arabian Gulf region. We're already seeing the tanker shipments in the Strait of Hormuz, that critical choke point in the Arabian Gulf. All tanker traffic is essentially grounded to a halt because of ongoing military operations there, and fear by oil traders and suppliers and shipping companies that their ship might be struck by an errant missile or might be directly targeted by the Iranians. And we have seen the first limited strikes by Iranian missiles against natural gas processing facilities in the region. So that might be a suggestion of things to come. And that, of course, could potentially significantly impact the economic calculation by the White House on whether to continue this operation. And the big question is as the what's left of the government in Tehran gets more and more desperate, will they lash out? Will they conduct operations targeting major oil infrastructure in the region out of pure desperation? Or what if the current triumvirate that on paper is now the new government in Tehran, do they have the authority and the ability to even communicate with the American and Israeli cyber attacks, essentially having the ability to render communications null and void? Will what's left of the authorities in Tehran be able to control or give orders to Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps commanders on the ground? And that is also a wild card factor.
Yeah, there's an awful lot in there, Ube. I mean, I think with hindsight, Venezuela actually looks like a pretty shrewd strategic move now, considering what's happening in terms of energy supply. Yeah. How is this affecting President Trump politically, do you think? I mean, there are election cycles beginning. Has this had any kind of impact on him politically back at home?
I mean, this is an extraordinary gamble. We have midterm elections coming up in November, but President Trump is a gambler. But the gamble here, according to the White House, is calculated. That President Trump initially was given options to launch this operation weeks ago, but he wanted to wait until more American military assets were transferred from the continental United States and Europe into the region, that more munitions that are stored throughout various multiple locations around the earth were brought closer to the Middle East so that they could be used, with the expectation that a significant amount of interceptors, very expensive interceptors, will be used to shoot down Iranian ballistic missiles and intermediate range missiles. The Central Command and the Department of War understood that, based on their intelligence and based on Israeli intelligence, that Iran had largely rebuilt its ballistic missile stockpile since the 12-day war last year. And so this is where Iran has been able to achieve some level of operational success, because those Shahed kamikaze drones that the Iranians have been building for years and exporting to Russia to be used in Ukraine, to be launched against Ukrainian civilian and military infrastructure, those Shahed drones can be mass produced and they're cheap. So it doesn't make sense for a PAC-2 or a PAC-3 expensive long-range interceptor that costs tens of millions of dollars to be used against those Shahed kamikaze drones. And that's where we've seen some of the initial American military casualties, because those Shahed drones were able to slip through the American air defense network. And that's a lesson for many of the Arabian Gulf states here to try to produce cheap and mass production of a cheap air defense alternative that can take down these Shahed drones en masse. And so now we're seeing many of these governments looking to lessons learned in Ukraine on how the Ukrainians have been managing to produce en masse drone interceptors, drones that are then used to intercept drones mid-flight before they hit their military objective. So I think the big question here in Washington is that if there is a major economic impact, or if there are major mass casualties, to include the very real fear of Iranian asymmetric terror, perhaps activating a terror cell that would kill American tourists abroad, or to launch a domestic terror strike here in the United States. The FBI and intelligence services are also very concerned about that potential scenario. So if those, from the economic side and from the asymmetric terror attack perspective, if those scenarios play out, that could perhaps impact the view of the American public of this war. Thus far, it seems that Epic Fury, because it is being perceived as being widely successful, we are seeing the president receiving broad support amongst both Democrats and Republicans of this operation. Still very early days.
Ube, great to have your analysis. Thank you very much for keeping us all up to date from Washington. Thank you. Okay, after the break, we'll look at how surging oil prices and tumbling markets are rattling investors amid fears of supply disruptions through the Strait of Hormuz. Stay with us. Welcome back to Primetime. Oil prices have surged and stock markets have fallen after US and Israeli strikes on Iran raised fears over shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. Investors are also moving money into gold.
Oil prices jumped sharply at the start of trading after the United States and Israel carried out major strikes on Iran, escalating the conflict in the Gulf. Brent crude briefly surged by more than 10% in early trading before easing back, but it remains significantly higher. At the same time, stock markets across Asia fell as traders reacted to concerns over possible supply disruptions. Gold prices climbed as investors sought safer assets. The immediate concern is the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which roughly 1/5 of the world's oil and large volumes of liquefied natural gas pass each day. Following the strikes, said vessels had come under attack near the area. Some shipping companies have halted transit and tanker traffic has slowed, with vessels waiting on either side of the strait. Iran has not formally announced a closure, but media reports say Tehran warned tankers that no ships would be allowed to pass. OPEC Plus has agreed a modest increase in output, yet experts say that will not matter if shipments cannot move. Economists say the key factor now is duration. If tensions ease quickly, markets may stabilize. If fighting continues, energy prices could remain elevated, adding further strain to the global economy.
Well, joining me now is Ricardo Evangelista. He is a financial market analyst at Active Trades, and he's in London in the UK. Very good to have you with us. Thank you for joining us on Primetime. Oil prices surged by more than 10%, but how much of this spike is driven by real supply risks versus, I guess, just market panic?
Good evening. Well, it's difficult to say exactly how much is panic and how much is actual supply risk. I would say it's definitely a mix of the two. Obviously, with shipping lanes blocked by fears of attacks in the Strait of Hormuz, that means that between 20 and 25% of the global oil output is basically off the market. So it all depends how long this conflict goes on for. But right now, what we're seeing with this escalation in the prices of crude is that traders already started pricing in a higher risk of prolonged disruption to the global supply of oil. We can't talk about panic yet, but there's definitely some fear. However, these fears can dissipate if the conflict is solved, or if there is a realistic perspective of a timely solution, say within a week, 10 days. Otherwise, then we will start seeing real fear, and then quite possibly prices will escalate at a faster pace and could very quickly jump through the $100 per barrel level.
And in that negative scenario, Ricardo, I mean, what actually happens? Do things sort of do risks increase in a kind of a linear way as the supply is increasingly restricted, or does there come a point where markets kind of adapt because they understand the totality of the problem?
No, there is a direct correlation here between the duration of this conflict and the level of anxiety that oil traders will feel. So, as we all know, oil is traded using future contracts. So, buyers of oil establish a contract with the supplier for delivery at a future date. So if disruption to this shipping route only lasts, say, for a week or 10 days, then the impact on future deliveries will not be that bad, and it's manageable. However, if uncertainty persists, then we can see these anxiety levels rising very quickly. And traders will start pricing in a much higher risk of deliveries in April, in May, in June being disrupted. And as I said, we're talking about roughly a quarter of the global oil output being off the market. And if that happens, then there will be more demand than supply in the markets, and we all know what happens in that scenario, which is an increase in price.
And Ricardo, this pattern of stock markets falling while gold increases, the gold price increasing, is that something that you expect to continue?
Once again, it depends on how things evolve in Iran and in the Gulf region, in the Middle East, more broadly speaking. But it's a typical reaction in the scenario that we're currently going through. So there has been a large-scale military attack on Iran. Iran has retaliated by attacking a number of targets in the region. And what normally happens in a scenario like this is that investors will almost automatically divert investment flows from risk-related assets, such as, for example, shares, into assets that are considered safe havens, such as gold. So the pattern we are observing now is quite typical in a scenario where a large military conflict started, and of which the outcome it's still uncertain.
OPEC Plus has agreed to increase output, albeit quite modestly. But does that matter? If tanker traffic remains disrupted, stuck, can't get through, does that increase actually matter?
It matters, but not in a large scale. So we know that Saudi Arabia is able to export oil via pipeline. That does not entail shipping it via the maritime route through the Strait of Hormuz. However, we're talking about small, in the grander scheme of things, small quantities, and therefore the impact will in a minimal way mitigate the much larger effects caused by the blockage of the shipping of Hormuz. So it helps, but not by much.
Ricardo, thank you very much for being with us. We appreciate your analysis very much indeed. Thank you.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at the top business news stories of the day with Andy Mioch. Stay tuned. Okay, welcome back. Andy Mioch is here with the very latest business news stories. Andy, what's on your agenda tonight?
Well, Guy, as you might imagine, and as you covered it so nicely with all your guests, the Middle East conflict has sent oil prices sky high. Markets are tumbling across the globe. India and Canada are resetting their economic ties, and there's also a few AI stories out there. So let's have a look. As the U.S.-Israel conflict with Iran entered its third day, prospects of a further escalation sent oil prices surging. Investors are assessing the risks to supply disruption, mainly through the Strait of Hormuz, that accounts for a fifth of global oil flows.
Oil prices jumped Monday, hitting their highest levels in months as Iran and Israel stepped up a conflict in the Middle East. International benchmark Brent crude briefly topped $82 per barrel. It was up around 6% by early afternoon in Asia, with US oil seeing similar gains. Analysts at Citi now expect Brent to trade between $80 and $90 a barrel this week. Israel launched a new wave of strikes on Tehran on Sunday, and Iran responded with more missile barrages. The attacks put ships at risk, with missiles hitting at least 3 tankers off the Gulf Coast and killing 1 seafarer. That was according to shipping sources and officials on Sunday. Iran says it has closed navigation through the Strait of Hormuz, a key route for oil supplies. The news prompted checks on stockpiles by refiners and governments in Asia. That region gets most of its crude from the Gulf, which accounts for half of China's supply and 90% of Japan's. International shipping has almost come to a standstill at the entrance to the Strait of Hormuz, with analysts warning that a prolonged conflict could push energy prices even higher. On Sunday, data showed more than 200 vessels, including oil and liquefied gas tankers, had dropped anchor around the strait and surrounding waters. Amid the conflict, the OPEC+ group of oil-exporting nations on Sunday agreed to a modest output boost of 206,000 barrels per day for April.
And no better time to hear from the U.S. President Donald Trump himself, who is speaking at a medal awards ceremony. So let's hear his thoughts on the third day of the conflict.
Regime, and they are indeed sick and sinister. Our objectives are clear. First, we're destroying Iran's missile capabilities, and you see that happening on an hourly basis, and their capacity to produce brand new ones, and pretty good ones they make. Second, we're annihilating their Navy. We've knocked out already 10 ships. They're at the bottom of the sea. Third, we're ensuring that the world's #1 sponsor of terror can never obtain a nuclear weapon, never going to have a nuclear weapon. I said that from the beginning. They're never going to have a nuclear weapon. They were on the road to getting one legitimately through a deal that was signed foolishly by our country. And finally, we're ensuring that the Iranian regime cannot continue to arm, fund, and direct terrorist armies outside of their borders. And we thought we had a deal, but then they backed out, and they came back, and we thought we had a deal, and they backed out. I said, you can't deal with these people. You got to do it the right way. Today, we grieve for the 4 heroic American service members who have been killed in action, and send our love and support to their families. In their memory, we continue this mission with ferocious, unyielding resolve to crush the threat this terrorist regime poses to the American people, and a threat indeed it is. We have the strongest and most powerful, by far, military in the world, and we will easily prevail. We're already substantially ahead of our time projections, but whatever the time is, it's okay. Whatever it takes, we will always. And we have, right from the beginning, we projected 4 to 5 weeks, but we have capability to go far longer than that. We'll do it. Whatever somebody said today, they said, oh, well, if the president wants to do it really quickly, after that he'll get bored. I don't get bored. There's nothing boring about this. Do you agree with that, Pete? I don't think there's anything, Mr. General. I think there's nothing boring about it. Somebody actually said from the media, I think he'll get bored after about a week or 2. No, we don't get bored. I never get bored. If I got bored, I wouldn't be standing here right now, I guarantee you that, to go through what I had to go through. We also projected 4 weeks to terminate the military leadership, and as you know, that was done in about an hour, so we're ahead of schedule there by a lot. But please join me in thanking every American service member who bravely is standing in harm's way. They really are incredible, and I just want to thank you. We have a lot of them right here. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. We have a lot of great service members here with us, too, in this beautiful building. Isn't it beautiful? We're adding on to the building a little bit. We're improving the building. See that nice drape? When that comes down, right now you see a very, very deep hole. But in about a year and a half from now, you're going to see a very, very beautiful building. And there's your entrance to it right there. In fact, it looks...
Well, we just heard from the U.S. President Donald Trump live from Washington, D.C., speaking about the military campaign in Iran. He vowed to continue the mission and said the nation is grieving the 4 soldiers who lost their lives during the campaign. He gave out another detail, claiming that U.S. and Iran had made a deal, but that Tehran had backed out. Speaking on the length of the campaign, he said that whatever it takes, quote, and he said, we start projected 4 or 5 weeks, but we'll do whatever it takes. Anyways, back to business news and European and Asian markets who reacted to this conflict. They opened the week in the red, with stocks from almost all major sectors dropping. Defense and energy stocks, however, jumped as investors reacted to the dramatic military escalation.
European shares fell across the board on Monday as the military conflict in the Middle East showed no signs of easing, while energy and defense stocks jumped. The Pan-European Stoxx 600 fell 1.8% to its lowest since mid-February to 622.35 points by 8:12 Greenwich Mean Time, retreating from a record high hit on Friday, with most sectors in the deep red. Energy majors Shell, BP and Total Energies all gained over 5% each, following oil prices, which surged as much as 13% after shipping in the crucial Strait of Hormuz was disrupted by retaliatory Iranian attacks. The energy index was 3.5% higher. Stock markets in Japan and Taiwan closed lower on Monday following the jump in oil prices fueled by the conflict, spurring investors to safe havens such as the US dollar, gold and government bonds. Taiwan Stock Exchange capitalization-weighted stock index dropped 319.4 points, or 0.9%, and closed at 35,095 on Monday. Japan's Nikkei share average closed down at 56,941 points, plunging 1.35%.
In another geopolitics moment, India and Canada have unveiled a sweeping package of measures aimed at restoring and deepening economic and strategic cooperation. During Prime Minister Mark Carney's visit to New Delhi, a uranium supply deal was struck, and the two sides announced finalizing a trade pact by the end of the year.
Strategic partnership.
India and Canada will aim to conclude a free trade pact by the end of this year, Prime Minister Mark Carney said on Monday during his first visit to New Delhi, as the two countries seek to move past years of diplomatic friction to get economic ties back on track. New Delhi and Ottawa hope to increase bilateral trade to $50 billion by 2030. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi said during a joint media appearance with Carney, from nearly $9 billion in 2024 to 25. The two sides have agreed to the terms of reference on a comprehensive economic partnership, the Indian Foreign Ministry added. They also agreed on a $2.6 billion uranium deal and will work on building small modular nuclear reactors and advanced reactors, both sides said. The Indian government and Canada's Cameco have signed a uranium supply agreement to support India's nuclear ambitions.
In artificial intelligence news, OpenAI has signed a deal with the Pentagon for its AI tools to be used in the military's classified systems. The deal comes after rival Anthropic dropped out over ethics concerns. OpenAI's CEO claims military will not use its AI product for autonomous killing systems or mass surveillance.
OpenAI said it had struck a deal with the Pentagon to supply AI to classified US military networks, hours after President Donald Trump ordered the government to stop using the services of one of the company's main competitors. Sam Altman, OpenAI's CEO, announced the move on Friday night. It came after an agreement between Anthropic, a rival AI company that runs the Claude system, and the Trump administration broke down after Anthropic sought assurances its technology would not be used for mass surveillance, nor for autonomous weapons systems that can kill people without human input. Announcing the deal, Altman insisted that OpenAI's agreement with the government included assurances that it would not be used to those ends. Altman also said he hoped the Pentagon would offer the same terms to all AI companies. The announcement came after the US president directed the government to stop work with rival Anthropic, and the Pentagon said it would declare the startup a supply chain risk. The Pentagon had demanded Anthropic loosen ethical guidelines on its AI systems or face severe consequences.
Still with tech, this year's edition of the Mobile World Congress has opened in Barcelona, drawing thousands of participants and visitors. From AI systems to 6G connectivity, the four-day event is expected to highlight tech that could shape the next decade.
Thousands of delegates and visitors descended on Barcelona's Mobile World Congress on Monday as the tech fair kicked off, filling the Fira Gran Via halls for the start of the industry's biggest annual gathering. Artificial intelligence and the ethics surrounding its rapid deployment sits high on this year's agenda, with organisers framing the 2026 theme as the IQ era, focusing on intelligent systems and the growing role of AI across devices. Exhibitors are showcasing how AI is reshaping smartphones, wearables and connected services, with major brands unveiling new concepts, foldable smartphones and robotics. The four-day event, marking its 20th year in Barcelona, runs through March 5th and is expected to draw heavy crowds as companies pitch their latest innovations and debate the future of mobile technology, connectivity and regulation.
And that is a wrap on the business brief for tonight. Back to you, Guy.
Andy, thank you very much indeed. Okay, after the break, we'll examine how Keir Starmer's cautious stance and deep divisions within the European Union are shaping Europe's response to the widening Middle East conflict. Do stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching PrimeTime. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer says Britain was not involved in the US-Israel operation that killed Iran's supreme leader and will not join further offensive action. But after retaliatory missile attacks hit sites where British nationals were staying, London says destroying launch capabilities is now necessary to protect lives.
The United States has requested permission to use British bases for that specific and limited defensive purpose. We have taken the decision to accept this request to prevent Iran firing missiles across the region, killing innocent civilians, putting British lives at risk, and hitting countries that have not been involved. I want to be very clear. We all remember the mistakes of Iraq, and we have learned those lessons. We were not involved in the initial strikes on Iran, and we will not join offensive action now.
The UK, France and Germany have announced that they are willing to take defensive actions to destroy any potential threats posed by Iran. But many of the European Union's member states remain divided over the legality of the US and Israel strikes on the country and how to respond going forward. Well, William Denislow reports now from Brussels.
At the conclusion of Sunday's emergency meeting of EU foreign ministers, the European Union's top diplomat and foreign affairs chief, Kai Kallas, released a statement on behalf of the European Union, in which she said that Iranian attacks on the region were inexcusable. She said that she sees the situation with utmost concern, calling for a maximum restraint. She also said that actions are being taken to ensure that EU citizens in the wider region are protected. Now, member states are divided on this issue, especially the legality of the strikes by the US and Israel under international law. We've seen that play out in comments from several EU leaders. We've heard from Pedro Sanchez, the Prime Minister of Spain. He says that he rejects the unilateral military action by both the US and Israel. On the other hand, we've heard from the likes of Friedrich Merz, the German Chancellor. He says that this is not a time to lecture our allies. He says that despite doubts that he may have, he shares many of the same goals. This really highlights the precarious position the EU is standing on while they have called for diplomacy and for negotiations to resolve these issues, most notably Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile program. Big questions about the response the US took, how it's conducting its business on the international stage, but at the same time not wanting to isolate themselves from the US. We've already heard from one prominent US Senator, Lindsey Graham, describing the EU's response as pathetic, really suggesting the position that the EU finds itself in. Now, we have had a stance from the E3, the group of the UK, France and Germany, taking more of a proactive stance in the region, saying they are ready to take what they describe as defensive actions to destroy threats at their source. So really saying they could conceivably target such as where drones are coming from in Iran, as well as their missiles. We also know that France has announced that it is deploying one of its aircraft carriers to the region. So while some in Europe are willing to take further action, seemingly aligning a little closer with the US, there is certainly also some trepidation from other EU member states. This all comes as the European Commission is holding a security college on Monday to discuss this issue of how the EU should proceed during these incredibly precarious times for the region. Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission President, warns that the safety in the Middle East and in the wider region is interwoven with Europe, and threats that Cyprus could be targeted with missiles just shows and gives credence to quite how interlinked that really is. William Denslow, Free News in Brussels.
Okay, we're joined now by Vlad Oltino, political analyst from Brussels. Vlad, very good indeed to have you with us. UK, France, Germany, all looks quite cautious, a little bit hesitant, but are we starting to see the beginnings of Europe now edging closer to direct military involvement?
It is a very, very good question, and I think the future will tell us if that would be the case. And the future, as President Trump put it, is a few weeks. So President Trump mentioned the 5 weeks readiness for the campaign, although he said it will take the time that is necessary. In terms of the EU response, I think the first question is indeed the use of space, of airspace from the EU, but also the direct threats from Iran. Iran had already targeted, the understanding is Cyprus, which is not only a member of the EU, but also the president of the current council, rotating presidency of the EU, and probably targeted also because technically probably it was easier to target as nearer to Iran than anything else in the EU. This will need some form of a response. If that happens once, it's one thing. If that happens more than once, or if other places are targeted, of course, probably a response will be needed. So I think we shall see in the next few days or weeks how the situation evolves and what exactly the EU will do from a military standpoint.
There are divisions, Vlad, aren't there, between member states, particularly over the legality of US and Israeli strikes. How serious is this split, do you think, when it comes to more widely for European unity?
Yeah, I think for sure the legality of the action is clearly put in question by quite some of the EU members. And that is because the EU took, since quite a long time, a very clear position about the international order and the fact that the international order, based on rules, based on the rule of law, based on international institutions, should be maintained. And this indeed is not necessarily maintained into such a conflict, which doesn't have the approval of the United Nations Security Council. So clearly, the EU is going into a critique mode from that point of view. At the same time, I think if the territory of the EU or the interests of the Union would be military targeted, I would suppose that the unity in the Council would be clearly there. So for the moment, the legality is more of a theoretical discussion, but in very pragmatic and realistic terms, a lot will depend on how the situation will evolve military and in terms of the interests and the territory of the Union targeted by or not targeted by Iran.
And then Prime Minister Starmer, of course, in that very cautious speech, Vlad, talking about Britain having learnt the lessons of Iraq, yet they are granting US base access, aren't they? I mean, you could look back at the beginnings of the Iraq situation and say, well, in a way that started fairly cautiously too. Do you see absolute red lines on behalf of the UK?
I do not see absolute red lines. I think the UK is in a position in which probably it will grant the space if the US would ask for it. I think other countries in the EU will do the same. So I think this is a question of asking for it and the question of actually needing it really for this operation. And of course, a lot will depend on how the operation will evolve in the next days and weeks. At the same time, I do think that indeed the more important thing on the example, very good example that you used on the Iraq situation, I think is what happens in this current conflict over the next weeks and months in terms of stabilizing Iran. Because an Iran which is unstable for months or years is actually a very, very significant threat and liability to the Middle East security and generally to the world security. So stabilizing Iran fast is actually extremely important. And I think the Iraqi example showed exactly that. Not just the Iraqi example, but if we go into the recent history, we have a number of them. We have Libya, and we know what happened there. We do have Tunisia next door. We had a number of places we have Afghanistan, of course. So we had a number of places which were destabilized and the consequences were not great. In the case of Iran, the consequences could be even more important, again, for the Middle East and for the world. So stabilization in the region is extremely important and should be done as a matter of priority.
Let's just take a look at France in all this. They've obviously deployed an aircraft carrier. They're taking a strong position within the E3. How does Monsieur Macron play this now? What do you think they're thinking their strategy is likely to be?
It is probably a strategy of, we participate in the campaign because basically what we would like to ensure, first of all, is security. So I think if we look again at the example of France in the war, in the previous missile exchange in between Iran and Israel, France took also a defensive approach in Mediterranean to protect the Israeli territory from missile attacks from Iran. I do think that France and the European Union indeed considered the current regime in Iran as being a quote-unquote a terrorist regime. So I think all those actions are based also on that assumption and on that decision made at the European Union level. A very important step, and this is not necessarily a red line, but a line that may or may not be crossed, is if France would decide to participate proactively to the military operations. For the moment, I think the idea is not to proactively participate, but more to take a defense line. Of course, that may change. One thing which may accelerate that change is for the Hormuz blockade, and let's see how that will evolve, because that blockade has a direct impact and a direct severe economic impact on the European markets, especially in terms of energy, but not just in terms of energy, because Hormuz, of course, is a big point of crossing from goods from China to the EU, and that is a significant part of the EU supplies currently. So I think that Hormuz Channel blockade may actually precipitate action from the EU member states into a more offensive mode.
Yeah, very interesting dynamic indeed. Vlad, we thank you as always for your analysis. Thank you.
Thank you.
After the break, we'll assess whether Israeli strikes on Beirut signal the opening of a dangerous second front in Lebanon and what that could mean for the widening regional war. Stay with us. A warm welcome back wherever you're watching Prime Time. Now, tensions in the Middle East are intensifying as Lebanon moves to restrict Hezbollah's military operations following the group's pledge to support Iran in the conflict. Israel has struck targets in Beirut, reportedly killing a Hezbollah commander and injuring dozens, while missiles have also hit Israeli cities. Our very own Maria Rodriguez Abaldi has more now from Tel Aviv.
Lebanon says it will ban Hezbollah's military activity and force it to hand over its weapons, a historic development following Hezbollah's announcement that it would join the war in support of Iran. Israel struck Beirut hard, claiming to have killed one of the army's group's leaders and leaving 30 other casualties. Simultaneously, Lebanon is attacking northern Haifa, but the conflict continues to escalate throughout the Middle East. As Saudi Arabian refinery was attacked, 3 USA fighter jets crashes in Kuwait. Also, tensions rise in Cyprus and EU member states after Iran's attack on a UK base. Greece sends fighter jets to the island where Paphos airport has been closed following a drone strike at the British base in Akrotiri in the southwest of the country. Here in Israel, a missile struck a residential building in Beersheba, leaving about 20 people injured. The Israeli army is preparing to absorb about 100,000 reservists who have been called up to reinforce all the sectors.
Well, joining me now is Nuno Martins, a political analyst in Brussels. Nuno, very good to have you with us. I mean, it's what nobody wanted, but how close is this conflict now to opening a sustained second front, do you think, in Lebanon?
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here as always. I do believe that the fact is it was quite clear that having Hezbollah as a proxy of the Iranians, of course launching a strike between Israel and Hezbollah. That's one of the things, but we are not surprised by any strikes between Israel and Hezbollah. So the question is also the strengths that Hezbollah has in Lebanon. I don't believe that the battlefield became very major in Lebanon, on one hand. On the other hand, as you can see, as it looks like, the fire made by Iran against its neighbors and against some bases, both American bases and European bases, such as France and English, shows, in my view, that the Iranians are quite desperate to show that they can reply to the attacks by Israel and the US, and they don't have a strategy on how to do that. So to summarize, it's basically what I do believe, that whatever Hezbollah is going to do, it's not going to be too strong. Of course, that they will have the reply of Israel. And if you can see that the Hezbollah draw a red line about the death of Ali Khamenei on Saturday, and that red line compared to what happened is quite weak in my view.
Yeah, Nuno, as you rightly say, nobody's surprised by the fact of Israel and Hezbollah getting into conflict, of course, but more people are very interested in the timing. Why do you think that Hezbollah have chosen this moment, and how do you think this might shape the wider conflict?
I don't think that Hezbollah shows necessarily this moment. I think that Hezbollah, even though it has certain strengths to continue attacking Israel, it doesn't have the strengths they used to have before, because it was exactly Hezbollah that was a victim of a certain type of attack by the Israeli forces against its leaders, and they are seeing its major proxy, or major, let's say that they are the proxy of Iran, the Iranian regime and the Iranian leadership being also a victim of that type of actions. So the question is this: I don't think, to be honest, that this will go into a wide developed stage. It's true that there were some threats by Qatar and by Saudi Arabia towards Iran, but the question is, we will see how strong both Hezbollah and Iran at large will have and will be in order to go into that development in the region, as everybody is saying, as a consequence of the US and Israeli attacks last Saturday morning.
And in terms of within Lebanon itself, we've seen that the Lebanese government have condemned Hezbollah's rocket attacks as illegal. Lebanon is a very complex country to try and understand. What is the current status quo when it comes to the sort of the public's view of what's happening with this conflict?
Well, that's a very important question. On one hand, if you look historically, it was since the Iranian Revolution in 1979 that things start to develop into the direction we have today, strengthening Hezbollah in Lebanon as a major party and as a major dominant figure in the south of Lebanon, especially after the Lebanese-Israeli war in the 1980s. This is one hand. So the domination of Hezbollah within Lebanese politics was very strong. I remember someone saying that in 24 hours, Hezbollah could dominate Lebanon both politically and militarily some years ago. I do believe that since as I said before, since the effective actions that Israel did against the Hezbollah leadership, that created a kind of vacuum, at least in terms of military. On the other hand, we continue seeing a certain influence, political influence of Hezbollah in Lebanon. And there is one thing that can, in my view, be on the side of Hezbollah, which is the political unity of Lebanon. Despite the fact that many people in Lebanon do not like Hezbollah, they also don't like Israel to attack the country. They see the country as one. And this is something that, in my view, also that the Lebanese people has to solve, and basically has to erase Hezbollah from the local politics if they want to have peace in the near future.
That's a very good point. And Nuno, the Israeli military has warned, hasn't it, of heavy action against Hezbollah, the Hezbollah leadership. How do you think Israel will play this now? Because on the one hand, it doesn't want to become distracted, but I guess it also does need to take a firm stance.
Well, I do believe that you have two different figures here. You have I don't think there is a distraction, because I do not think that the means used by Israel on the Iranian strikes and the war with Iran are exactly the same as used in the Hezbollah. We are talking about attacking Hezbollah, but also about incursions in the Lebanese territory by the Israeli forces on one hand, and you are talking about airstrikes in Iran. And this can make also a type of difference, and it can also make the point for Israel in the sense that one doesn't impeach necessarily the other, on one hand. On the other hand, what is interesting about the development that we are seeing in the war, any war that we are seeing today in 2026, is the development of the war itself, meaning that the means used by armies today are completely different from those that we are used to see in the past 20, 30, 40 years. And this can make the total difference, because the means used by Israel can, in my view, distinction between two different war zones, war realities, without one impeaching the other, as I said before.
And finally, Nuno, we've seen thousands of people fleeing southern Lebanon and Beirut's suburbs amid these bombardments. How severe do you think the humanitarian fallout could be of this?
Look, as I said, again, to continue what I just said, the modernity of the warfare, I do believe that the attacks against Hezbollah, as we already saw that today, will be basically concentrated on attacking the leadership of the group on one hand, and this will allow and this will diminish the humanitarian crisis in my view as well. There is the danger, of course, of a certain humanitarian crisis, but I do believe sincerely that the type of warfare that we have today allows somehow to diminish this humanitarian crisis, also because Hezbollah and the region where Hezbollah is in southern Lebanon is not the same as it is in Gaza, for instance. Also, they don't have as many tunnels as the Hamas build in Gaza, as far as I know. So the question is, this makes the whole difference. And this will, in my view, also diminish the humanitarian crisis that we could have and we had in the past, especially in the 1980s.
Nuno, always great to have you on PrimeTime. We thank you, as always, for your analysis.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Okay, after the break, we'll be checking in with our correspondents all around the world for the very latest developments in their regions. Stay with us. Okay, let's check in with our correspondents around the world. Moving to Afghanistan, and for the fifth straight day, Afghan and Pakistani forces have been exchanging fire along their shared border in a sharp escalation of tensions between the two countries. Both sides accuse the other of carrying out cross-border strikes, including air and drone attacks. Well, our correspondent Tamim Bahis has the details from Kabul.
Clashes have been reported across several provinces along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border after Afghan defense forces launched what they described as retaliatory attacks on Pakistani security outposts. Kabul say its response came after Pakistan carried out airstrikes inside Afghanistan, allegedly targeting militant sanctuaries. Afghan officials claim civilians were killed in those strikes and have vowed retaliation, calling the attacks a violation of Afghanistan's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Since the retaliation began, both sides say they have inflicted heavy casualties on each other, though those claims cannot be independently verified. Anti-aircraft guns were heard in Kabul over the weekend, as Afghan officials said that Pakistani aircrafts have entered its airspace and conducted several strikes in several provinces, including areas near the capital, Kabul. In turn, Afghanistan's Ministry of National Defense said it has carried out drone strikes inside Pakistan. However, there has been no confirmation of casualties from those operations. Pakistan accuses Kabul of harboring militants from the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, allegation the Kabul government has consistently denied. With earlier mediation efforts by Qatar, Turkey and Saudi Arabia failing to ease tensions, the situation remains volatile, raising concerns of further escalation between the two neighbors. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
Moving to Turkey now, and Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has expressed condolences following the death of Iran's supreme leader amid escalating regional tensions. Ankara has also taken precautionary security measures at sea while stepping up diplomatic contacts as concerns grow over a wider conflict.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan expressed his deep sorrow over the death of Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, amid ongoing attacks on Iran by Israel and the United States. In a social media post late Sunday, Erdogan conveyed Turkey's condolences to the Iranian people and said Ankara would continue working with regional partners and allies to help restore peace and stability. He stressed that diplomacy should remain the primary path forward and called for an end to the expanding regional conflict. Amid the steadily escalating tensions, Turkey has also taken precautionary measures. The General Directorate of Maritime Affairs has announced that the security level for Turkish-flagged vessels transiting the Strait of Hormuz had been raised to level 3, the highest alert level. The move followed reports that Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps had restricted the passage of ships through the strategic waterway, one of the world's most vital choke points for the transport of oil. A spokesman for Turkey's foreign ministry said that regional developments were being closely monitored, especially regarding the safety of Turkish nationals abroad. On the diplomatic front, President Erdogan held a series of phone calls over the weekend with international leaders, including U.S. President Donald Trump, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, and the leaders of Saudi Arabia and Kuwait to discuss the crisis. The U.S. Embassy in Ankara, meanwhile, has issued a security alert warning that regional tensions and negative perceptions of U.S. foreign policy could trigger anti-American demonstrations in Turkey. Authorities continue to watch developments closely as the situation unfolds. This is Adam Mara for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Here in Azerbaijan now, foreign nationals from 19 countries are being evacuated from Iran into Azerbaijan via the Astara border as regional tensions escalate. More than 400 people have crossed since Saturday, with more departures expected in the coming days. The evacuations follow US and Israeli strikes on Iran and Tehran's retaliatory missile attacks across the region. Well, our correspondent Gulcin Hojalieva reports with more.
A new wave of evacuees continues to arrive from Iran into Azerbaijan through the Astara border crossing as cross-border departures steadily increase. Authorities say more than 400 people have crossed into Azerbaijan since Saturday, including over 140 evacuees today, of whom 90 are foreign nationals. Approximately 30 Russian citizens were among the latest to enter safely after completing border procedures. Additional arrivals since morning included citizens of China, Tajikistan and Pakistan. Following document checks and registration, evacuees are being transported onward by specially arranged buses, with several vehicles continuing to depart from the checkpoint toward Baku.
In Iran, the situation is very tense. That's why we evacuate from Iran to Azerbaijan, and in border we have all facilities. There is no much tense in border. That's why we came here.
I was there in Urmia, Iran, just studying as MBBS just since 4 years, and just came here because of all. And there is no any other way. So we are very thankful of Azerbaijan that they welcome us and really good. But that's a hectic situation in Iran.
Overall figures show hundreds of foreign nationals from multiple countries have already been moved to safety through this corridor, which remains one of the few functioning land routes out of Iran. France's ambassador to Azerbaijan, Sophie Lagut, has also expressed gratitude to Azerbaijani authorities for assisting French citizens in leaving Iran. Border operations remain active, with further crossings expected as evacuation procedures continue. Gulcin Hojalieva, Nicat Kasımov, A News.
To Central Asia now, and Tashkent has expressed deep concern over the escalating conflict in the Middle East, calling for restraint and diplomatic dialogue as flight cancellations and travel disruptions begin affecting Uzbek citizens. Well, our correspondent reports from Tashkent.
The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Uzbekistan has issued an official statement expressing serious concern over the sharp escalation of tensions in the Middle East, warning that further aggravation could lead to unpredictable military, political and humanitarian consequences. Tashkent called on all sides to exercise maximum restraint and emphasized that the crisis must be resolved in accordance with international law through political and diplomatic means. Uzbekistan reaffirmed its commitment to regional stability and expressed hope for a swift normalization of the situation. Amid the escalating conflict, Uzbekistan's foreign minister held telephone consultations with counterparts from Qatar, Kuwait, Oman, Jordan, Bahrain, Azerbaijan and the United Arab Emirates. The sides exchanged views on the rapidly evolving situation and reaffirmed their commitment to respecting sovereignty and resolving disputes through dialogue. The crisis has already affected civilian aviation. Uzbekistan Airways cancelled flights between Tashkent and Dubai, as well as Tashkent and Tel Aviv due to airspace closures in the region. Flights to Jeddah currently operating via alternative routes for safety reasons. In addition, departures for Umrah pilgrimage have been suspended until further notice. Beginning March 2nd, repatriation flights are being organized from Jeddah to bring Uzbekistan pilgrims home. The Foreign Minister has advised citizens to postpone non-essential travel to Middle East and to remain in close contact with diplomatic missions. It is Sivil Rajab reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A-News.
To Georgia now, and Georgia's foreign ministry has responded to the escalating situation in the Middle East, expressing concern over rising tensions and calling for diplomatic de-escalation. At the same time, political analysts are assessing what a prolonged confrontation could mean for regional security and for Georgia itself. Our correspondent reports from Tbilisi.
The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Georgia has expressed deep concern over ongoing developments in the Middle East. In a statement published on social media, the ministry underlined the importance of diplomatic engagement to ensure de-escalation and maintain regional stability. Authorities are calling on Georgian citizens in the region to follow official guidance and take necessary safety precautions. The ministry also confirmed that Georgia's embassies remain fully operational and ready to provide assistance if required. The escalation centers on growing military confrontation between Iran and Israel, a development that analysts say carries implications beyond the immediate conflict zone. According to political assessments, if air operations continue over an extended period, the region could face increased displacement and broader security pressures. For Georgia, this may translate into humanitarian and security challenges, including the possibility of refugee flows. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A-News.
Global air travel is, of course, under severe strain as escalating strikes involving the US, Israel and Iran trigger widespread Middle East airspace closures. Now, key hubs remain shut or restricted, grounding thousands of flights and disrupting international connectivity with no clear timeline for recovery.
Global air travel is facing one of its most serious disruptions in years after US and Israeli strikes on Iran and Tehran's retaliation across the Gulf triggered widespread airspace closures. For a third straight day, major aviation hubs in Dubai, Abu Dhabi and Doha remain shut or operating under heavy restrictions. Dubai International Airport, normally the world's busiest airport for international travel and a critical east-west crossroads handling around 500 flights a day, has suspended operations after sustaining damage during retaliatory attacks. Aircraft and crews are now stranded across multiple continents, throwing tightly coordinated global schedules into disarray. From Frankfurt to Bali, thousands of flights have been cancelled or diverted, leaving passengers stranded at airports worldwide. Some long-haul services to Australia have turned back mid-journey, while travellers scramble to find alternative routes. Authorities in several countries warn that disruption could continue as airlines are forced to navigate longer, more complex and more expensive flight corridors. The impact goes far beyond passenger travel. Gulf transit hubs serve as critical arteries for global trade and air cargo. Prolonged closures are adding pressure to already strained supply chains, while rising oil prices are driving up operational costs for airlines. Even if regional airspace reopens soon, aviation analysts say it could take days or longer for global schedules to stabilise as displaced aircraft and crews gradually return to position. Amid the disruption, the South Caucasus region, including Azerbaijan, has emerged as an increasingly important alternative transit corridor. Flight tracking data shows a sharp rise in long-haul east-west traffic rerouted through its airspace, underscoring its strategic position between Europe and Asia during regional instability. For now, uncertainty remains the overriding concern. With no clear timeline for the full reopening of regional skies, The aviation sector is once again confronting how quickly geopolitical tensions can disrupt global connectivity.
Well, joining me now is Mohammed Mammadov, Research Fellow at the Chubashov Center from Baku here in Azerbaijan. Mohammed, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Primetime. Always good to see you. How are disruptions then from Iran reshaping civilian and commercial airspace over the South Caucasus in particular? And what alternative routes are carriers using?
Yeah, the movements so far have shifted to the South Caucasus, especially in the east-west direction, and it shows the middle corridor and broader Trans-Caspian connectivity is not a strategic and pivotal, not only for container transportation, trade routes, but also for air corridor. Yeah, so in that regard, I have to say that it's not the first time happening. First, Iran-Israel direct clash during 2024 in April and October. It happened, and the similar scenarios we saw unfolding during the 12-day war in June 2025. In all these cases, Iran closed its airspace for civilian traffic, and in that case, we saw the growing role of the South Caucasus, this Trans-Caspian east-west route for air traffic.
And what about key connectivity projects like the North-South and Middle corridors? What are the risks, do you think, to the South Caucasus trade routes and regional economic integration? This is clearly going to have an effect, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the most important point here is about the North-South corridor, which recently gained traction thanks to deepening partnership between Russia, Azerbaijan, and Iran. Especially, I have to mention Russian Energy Minister Tsilev's visit to Iran on February 18, and he signed some agreements, and then according to which the construction of the Rasht-Astara Railroad was supposed to start on April 1. So in that regard, the instability in Iran will most certainly delay that project. Today, Overchuk was in Baku, Mirzan Aliyev and his team, so certainly Rasht-Astara Railroad and broader North-South connectivity was part of the discussions because, as you know, Russia promised Azerbaijan guaranteed 5 million tons of cargo supply from 2028 January 1. It means that all was about the completion of the Rasht-Astara Railroad. But now we see that, due to this instability in Iran, we'll see the construction of the Rasht-Astara Railroad will most probably be postponed.
And we've seen, haven't we, the sharp effect on energy markets. What does that do to energy security and the way that countries like Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Armenia think about energy security?
Yeah, mostly it's about Azerbaijan because Azerbaijan, whenever these kinds of crises and critical junctures, Azerbaijan emerges as pivotal energy supplier. So in this case, we see that closure of Strait of Hormuz and Iranian attacks on cargo ships carrying energy through the strait, which supplies about barrels of oil daily, and also strategic because of Qatari LNG supplies for eastern markets. So we already see that the gas price in Europe was affected negatively. So it shows Azerbaijan's pivotal role in European energy security, both in case of oil and gas, will increase. Another point here is Azerbaijan's importance for its neighbors, Georgia and Armenia, will increase. As you know, as part of the normalization process with Armenia, Azerbaijan has been replacing some energy supplies from Russia, and energy cooperation was part of that process. Now we'll see that momentum will gain further traction after this instability in the Persian Gulf.
And we touched, Mohammed, on this with our economist guests near the top of the show. But to what extent can countries plan to insulate against this market volatility? We can all run scenarios. We know perhaps that this conflict may not be over for at least a number of weeks, perhaps even longer. Are there ways in which countries, particularly the ones you've just mentioned, can protect themselves from this energy market volatility?
I think in the short term, still, the markets were significantly affected in the first day, but then we saw that then it returned to some normalcy. The price stood at $78. But as you said, as the escalation ladder is climbed by both Iran and the United States, we will see some disruptions and growing uncertainty. So in that regard, I think the main strategy is diversification, and in that regard, all these countries in the region will look for alternative partners and partners to secure their supply. So in that, again, I think it's a opportunity for countries like Azerbaijan to show their importance for the market and adopt their moves accordingly.
And what's your thinking on potential migration flows? Because, of course, we've seen the scenes at the Azerbaijan-Iranian border. All looks very organized, lots of provisions, lots of security, people being very well looked after. But, of course, migration flows could increase dramatically, and they could go in all sorts of different directions. What is your thinking on how that might pan out?
Yeah, that's, I think, one of the worst case scenarios, because if, as a result of the United States and Israel attacks on key power centers of Iran, especially IRGC and Basij forces, we can see the government collapse. So in that regard, civil war may ensue. And again, this is a worst case scenario, and we can see people moving to neighboring countries. And here, Turkey, Armenia, and Azerbaijan are the priority destinations. And as you said, these countries have long been preparing for these kinds of worst case scenarios. For Azerbaijan, I think it's more important because those people who will be moving north are not normal, let's say, Iranian citizens, but they are ethnic Azerbaijanis. So in that regard, Azerbaijan will especially have to behave proactively to promote the interests of those people, protect their interests, and ensure their safety, that their interests are met.
And Iranian diplomacy for decades has been famous for its sort of dexterity, its multifaceted approach. If the current government does survive this onslaught, do you expect any of their regional diplomacy to adapt and change significantly?
In this situation, I think it's really difficult to see what kind of government will emerge in Iran from this instability, a very uncertain situation. But if the current government stay in place, we can definitely say that it will be very weakened. So we see now a scenario emerging in the South Caucasus, where two major regional powers, Russia to the north and Iran to the south, have been, let's say, involved in a major power conflict. So as a result, weakened. So of course it creates an opening for these countries to diversify their foreign relations and find new alliance networks and etc. And for Armenia, it is especially important because Iran has long been Armenia's major partner in the region, especially as they are diversifying away from Russia. Iran emerges as a key alternative. Now it's weakened. It will be very difficult for Armenians. And at the same time, for Azerbaijan, the challenge is with a weak Iran, we'll have an Israel seeking hegemony in the Middle East, facing Turkey. These are two major Azerbaijani allies, so Baku may find itself stuck in a very difficult position. But I think thanks to its growing military and economic potential in recent years, Azerbaijan will have some strategic autonomy to maneuver in this scenario.
Mohammed, we thank you very much indeed for joining us, and we appreciate your analysis very much indeed. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, that is all for Prime Time for tonight. Please do join us again tomorrow night with plenty more news and analysis. And from all of us here at A News, thanks for watching.